Well, welcome. Good to see everybody here. If I'm dancing around funny, it's my dog has decided to stake out right by my feet with her toy, so I'm going to try not to step on her here. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about paradoxes in Agile, or things that may seem one way when they're another, or from what we're going to kind of discover is a lot of it has to do like where our vantage point is. How are we looking at this? If we look at it from one way, it looks like it's impossible or it's a contradiction. But if we get in the right place, maybe it makes more sense. So let's look at a few just kind of interesting paradoxes. There's the bootstrap paradox, which is the idea, not necessarily related to Agile, but the idea that if you could go back in time and give Einstein his theory of relativity, and then he took that and published it, since he got it from you, and then later you read about it, which made you go back in time, who actually created it? So this is an interesting paradox, particularly, reading sci-fi novels and stuff like that. But there was an interesting version of this that I ran across that basically said if we wanted to discover a way to travel in time, they were laying out ways that it's a book about time travelers, I think is where this came from. And they were talking about how could we actually create a time machine, which is, I found it a fascinating idea. And kind of the paradox it introduced is what if we were to make a factory that was capable of producing a spaceship that could travel through the universe and find a wormhole? And if it found this wormhole that we think would let it travel back in time. And the idea is that you would create this factory, and all the factory needed was an input from a spaceship that it could create. And that input would say where the coordinates were for the wormhole. And so the idea was that once you finish building this factory, our old beat up spaceship would land, put the coordinates into the factory. The factory would then make the spaceship, which was that spaceship that had found the wormhole and gone back in time. But the bootstrap paradox of being able to start something up by having started it up. Anyway, it's an interesting theory. So question for you here. Let's look at a Slido. What do you think would happen if we built such a factory? Like, do you think it would actually, like, once you finish building it, the spaceship would then come back to that point, provide the coordinates, nothing would happen, aliens would attack and take over the factory, that's a possibility as well, or cost overruns would prevent the factory from ever actually completing and being built? Actually, I'm not sure if this is showing up for you. Let me make sure we've got Slido showing up for everybody here. Okay, there. I think you're able to see it in the side pane, or you can just go to slido.com. Okay, so 100% of us think the cost overruns would prevent the factory from being. Okay, that's only one person. So, is anyone else able to get to this? Is that working for everybody?
It's not popping up for me yet.
I'm sorry. What'd you say?
Doesn't seem like it's popping up for me.
That's not okay. I'll tell you what. Let me just put a normal link in there, and we'll. See, maybe I need to do something to share it with everybody. Something's not. Okay, well, it may just be easier to go to slido.com and enter that number in. That may be the best way. And keep it up because we'll be doing some things as we go. For some reason, let's see if this works. There we go. Let me throw this link in here just in case that's not working for anybody, because I'm really curious how people feel about these aliens. Okay, so there's a link in the chat. For some reason it's not popping up as an app in there. Okay, so it looks like a lot of us are saying cost overruns. So this sounds like people that have actually worked on big projects before. Cost overruns would prevent the factory from being built. 30% of us, or 27% of us, think that it might actually work. And 20% of us are like, aliens are going to take over. I think it's interesting, only 4% of us are like, yeah, nothing's going to happen here. So anyway, let's look at another paradox. There's the grandfather paradox. And this paradox you see illustrated in Back to the Future, which I just rewatched last week for think it's only the second time I've watched it, but it was interesting to kind of see, kind of have a reminder of what the 90s were like. So McFly goes into the past and prevents his parents from falling in love, which means he wouldn't exist. But if he didn't exist, he couldn't have gone to the past to prevent his parents from falling in love. But if he didn't prevent his parents from falling in love, then he could go back. So that's another common paradox that you see, particularly with time travel. You'll notice a lot of these are around time travel just because they're interesting. Another interesting paradox is the incompleteness paradox. So this is Gödel, and he was a mathematician, used to hang out with Einstein. As a matter of fact, there is a story of he didn't want to go to the doctor, and so Einstein and a couple people tricked him into getting into a car and took him to the doctor's office because he really needed to go to the doctor. I think he died in 76, 78, somewhere, or I'm sorry, yeah, 76, 78, somewhere in that time period. But he came up with the incompleteness paradox, which basically says, the way he stated it, or the question he was trying to answer is, are the axioms of a formal system sufficient to drive every statement that is true in all models of that system? And it's a very complicated way of saying, if we have a mathematical system, are there some things that are true in that system that we can't prove? So you end up, a very simple way to think of it is a statement like this that says, this statement is unprovable. Well, if that statement is true, then there's no way to prove it. If you can prove it, then it's not true. And basically, it's a very there's a book called Incompleteness that kind of walks through it better than I can explain it here. But it's basically this thing of saying there are some things that we can have that are true that we cannot prove, and he found a mechanism that he could do that in mathematics to say for any mathematical system, there's a way to have some things that are true that are unprovable. Anyway, it's a very interesting area, but another paradox. Okay, so now how does this relate to Agile? So the question for you here is, do you feel like you run into paradoxes on Agile projects? So things that seem two ways, like both of these things can't be true, or there's some aspect to it, like you can't do this until we do this other thing, but there's a circular reasoning there. So we got some of us think that yes, they run into Agile paradoxes on Agile projects. No one says no, but 17% say this is unprovable. And if you just joined and didn't have the link, here's a link to Slido, so you can bring that up. Give it just a few more seconds here. I think this is interesting that no one has said no. That's I was expecting to get a few in that, so that's interesting to me. Okay, well, good. Then you're at the right talk here. Okay, so what do paradoxes have to do with agility? Well, there are many aspects of agility that appear to be paradox, where something may seem one way, but it's actually another, or vice versa. And one of the interesting things when looking at kind of when Einstein was developing the theory of relativity is he was running into these paradoxes with, if time actually, or if the speed of light is an upper limit and you can't go any faster than that, then how does everything else fit together? And he was finally able to discover if we stand at the right vantage point, it all works together. Or if we're willing to let time vary, then everything works together just fine. And that was kind of the huge creative leap that he made, was that idea that things that we took for granted had to be one way. He was willing to say, well, what if we varied these things? And the reason I think that's important when it comes to thinking of agility and lots of things in life, but particularly when it comes to agility and how we actually deliver business value, is if we get so kind of blinders focused on we're trying to do these things right here that we stop to kind of see the big picture, we can end up doing things that are very detrimental to our projects. And I've seen that happen. I'm sure you guys have seen that happen in a lot of cases as well. And so often I think these paradoxes, or things that seem like contradictions, by really kind of digging into them and trying to understand them, it gives us a better overall picture of here's what it actually means to deliver software well, or here's what it actually means to for us to be successful in the way that we're delivering software. Understanding Agile paradoxes is a key to understanding agility. The resolution to most paradoxes is to use a different vantage point or to consider a different dimension. So if we're looking at a graph and there's, the two axes are showing us things and it seems to be contradictory, maybe we're putting the wrong axes on those graphs, or we're trying to measure the wrong things, or there's some other dimension to it that we need to be considering. So here's a question. A team of 5 developers has not been able to deliver a piece of software in 12 months. What will happen if you add 15 new developers to the team? So while you're answering that, I am going to try to see if I can get this to pop up, because I see it doesn't look like it's coming up for everybody the way it's supposed to. Okay, so I think that may actually, no, it's giving us a way to join it again. Okay, thought that would work. I need to play around with this some more, I guess. Let me throw the link out there one more time. Just keep that open in the browser and it should work. Whoops, I just spilled tea in my keyboard. Okay, while you're answering that, I'm going to grab a paper towel here because I just made a big mess. On the keyboard and on the dog. Okay, well, that will survive. Okay, a team of 5 developers have not been able to deliver a piece of software in 12 months. What will happen if you add 15 new developers to the team? 87% say the project will take even longer. 13% say the project will finish sooner. The paradox I want to introduce here is in many cases, there may be some cases where the project will finish sooner, but in quite a few cases, the project will actually take longer. You may have run into this. So the idea that more people will slow a project down. Fred Brooks in The Mythical Man Month said, adding manpower to a late software project makes it even later. And that's where a lot of this comes from. Now, this isn't to say that there's no possible way that adding people to a team will ever help them go faster. But particularly the way that Brooks kind of articulates it here is that if you have a project that's in trouble, simply adding more people to it is probably going to create more of the trouble before it fixes it, because you may not have fixed the underlying issue. On the other hand, if you have a team of 5 people that are really, really efficient in the way that they're working and are doing very, very well, and you add a few people to that team, you may develop a culture where it actually is possible to go faster. But if a team's doing the wrong things and you add more people to it, it's probably not going to undo the wrong things. So does increasing the number of hours worked each week increase the amount of work that gets done? Well, here's a image I wanted to just think of. So if we think about the idea of, okay, we're doing all this stuff and we're not getting anywhere, what will happen if we add more people to it? Well, here's an example. If this guy gets a bunch of friends to help him, there will be more hours worked. They still may not accomplish much of anything, right? Or this one, I like this one here. These 2 guys are working very, very hard, and we could add people, in pairs of people to both of those positions, and the amount accomplished will still be the same. And what I want to kind of introduce is this idea that the number of hours worked does not necessarily equal productivity. And if you're having problems delivering because maybe you're not doing the right things or your priority is messed up, you're having trouble figuring out what goes at the top of the next most important thing, simply adding more people to it is likely to make the problem worse. And if we look at the Agile principles, there's quite a few places where it kind of calls this out. So our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. If you have a team that is having trouble doing this, adding more people that do the same thing that are incapable of doing this is not going to make the project more successful. If you can fix this, and the team is able to start satisfying the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software, now you've actually solved a delivery problem, and maybe more people would actually help them be more efficient, or maybe you can have 2 teams working in parallel or something. But if you're not able to actually get things to the customer that satisfies the customer, just adding more people to it probably won't help. Another principle, working software is the primary measure of progress. If you're in a situation where you're having trouble delivering working software, the thing that you count as progress, adding more hours doing the same things that were unable to deliver working software may not actually help you move forward. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So this is another kind of example. If you have a lot of people working on something, it may be a lot harder to self-organize. If you've got a team of 5 people and they're not self-organizing well, adding 15 more people to it is probably not going to make it easier to self-organize. It's probably going to make it a lot harder. And so the kind of the aspect or the dimension or advantage point we need to consider in understanding this paradox may be thinking in terms of, before we scale something up, do we need to make sure that we have something that is actually worth scaling? And oftentimes that doesn't happen. I've seen a lot of teams that think they have a scaling problem when what they really have is they don't know how to produce software efficiently. And so they scale it up and they end up with just a lot more people inefficiently producing software. I think that might be what would happen if we tried to have this factory to create a spaceship, right? If we're not really good at creating spaceships, if we don't have a good process of creating spaceships, creating a spaceship factory might not be the next thing we want to do. So, question for you: what dimension do we need to consider here? When you're thinking of this, and there's not a right answer here, and I think I've even got set so you can select different things. But what dimension do you think is most important when it comes to the idea of adding people to a project? Is it that more people require more communication, so there's diminishing returns, or maybe even negative returns? Is it that working on the right thing is more important than hours spent? More people make things harder. It may be considering how skilled are the people being added. If current people are slowing things down, should some of them be removed? This is something I've seen a lot. Like the team's not able to deliver. Let's add more people to the team. Maybe you just need to replace some people. Maybe there's some people that are very, very skilled, but in this particular place, they're not actually able to contribute everything they're able to do. Their skills are in different areas, or the types of people that they're good at working with don't exist on this team, so they're not able to actually bring everything to the team. So just see what people think on some of these. So it looks like the top spot people are filling out is that working on the right thing is more important than hours spent. And I think that's a very important vantage point, I think, to be thinking about when we're dealing with agile teams is if we're not delivering well, everybody may have the best intent, everybody may be working very, very hard. But if we're not working on the most important thing, or we haven't done a really good job of prioritizing, that might be what's holding us back. And so we look at something and say, oh, there's not enough people. Everybody feels really busy. So it feels like we just need more people. And that can be one way of looking at it. But on a lot of teams, if we're able to better prioritize what we work on next, we can actually deliver more value, deliver more working software that we can delight the customers with. And so that's where the Agile principles, I think, can really steer us toward taking these things that it looks one way when we're on the ground working and like there's just so much work to do, but maybe it's not that we don't have enough people. Maybe it's actually the fact that the communication isn't happening, so we're working on things that really isn't the most important thing to the user. Or maybe we're investing in trying to work with really, really big batches, so the user doesn't get to see anything very soon, so they're not giving us feedback. And so a lot of the things that are going into the batch are things that if the customer fully understood what it was going to do, they would say, yeah, we don't need to do that. This other thing is more important. Okay, another kind of paradox. So we kind of have this idea, I think most people kind of agree, that if you try to go too fast, it'll make you slow. Like if you start cutting corners because you go too fast, it'll make you slow. On the other hand, there's also, okay, so and I've heard people say this is a marathon, not a sprint. And there is some value in this, in thinking about how are we approaching software development? Are we doing things that are, and Agile even calls it out, that the idea that we want to have sustainable processes and that everyone involved in the team should be able to continue at the pace indefinitely, right? So this is going to be something we're going to be able to do for a long time, not just burn people out. But on the other hand, trying to go slow will also make you slow. So we've got two things here. So trying to go fast will make you slow, trying to go slow will make you slow. It sounds like it's just going to be slow to produce software. And while there might be some truth around that, that still kind of creates this paradox where we don't know what do we need to do to actually create software efficiently. So we end up thinking kind of like this, right? There's how much work gets done on this axis going up and down, and then there's how fast we work. And the faster we work, the more work we get done in a period of time. And that's usually how we kind of think about things. So if we want to get more work done, we try to work faster. Like we're going to try to do more things to get more work done. But if we think about this from another dimension, or a different vantage point, is it possible that we're overlooking something that is very key in the way that we deliver software to the user? And so I would say it might be something like this. So how much value can our users get from the software? Well, if we think in terms of how much value is the user going to get next week, we probably need to think in terms of how fast can we deliver the smallest change. Now, we've still got the word fast in there, but that's a very different way of thinking about what we're trying to deliver. How can we get a small change through the smallest thing that the user says would be the next most valuable thing to them? How can we get that through and into their hands so they start getting value from our software? We could probably label it like this, right? How much value do users get from the software will be dependent on how small we can make our stories. So if we want to go fast, the goal isn't to just have more people working or people working more hours or typing faster. That may not actually help us. As a matter of fact, that may even slow us down. But if we want to go fast, what we really need to do is how do we deliver small things? And that's that's kind of that resolves the paradox, right? Instead of there is a way to go faster with stuff, but it's different than what things immediately appears. We need to move over to thinking about how do we get small valuable things into the customer's hands rapidly, rather than thinking how do we do lots of things or work more hours. You have to change to different dimensions and focus on shrinking your deliverable units of work down to things smaller, because that's how you go faster. Because if we can shrink the deliverable units of work down, smaller units mean more things can be deferred or left out. So part of what happens here, with you mentioned with the last point we looked at, is if I'm able to take something that we were seeing as one unit and I split it into 5 units, not all 5 things I can independently deliver, not every one of those things will have the same priority. We're going to have to choose which one to deliver next. If I think of it as one big block, I'm going to try to do it all together and deliver it. But if I break it up into 5 separate things, now the customer and the user gets to decide what they think is most valuable, and then what's most valuable after that. And in many cases, what you'll find is maybe 1 or 2 of those things, they'll say, yeah, you know what, when it was all one block, I thought we needed this. But now that I've gotten 2 of these things or 3 of these things, I'm willing to defer those things until later to work on something else that's even more valuable to me. And this is how you actually go fast, is being able to break things down into smaller so you can actually do less work, and you're able to deliver value more rapidly by doing less, but by trying to create fewer low value, by trying to create fewer things that are low value to the customer. But if we don't split things up, we won't even see that. We'll deliver all these things together as large chunks of stuff. When a team is focused on going fast, it usually translates into being busy, or a certain amount of their work translates into being busy. This usually results in doing more lower priority work at the expense of what the customer really needs delivered first. And this can be a difficult thing to, if you haven't ever experienced this may not feel very realistic. But if you've worked with a team that's been able to really sit down with the customer and say, okay, here's what you asked for. Which piece of this do you want first? Let me give you this slice of it first, and let's get that in your hands, and you give us feedback if it's what you want, even though we're leaving out all these other things that you said is important, but we want to make sure we give you the most important thing. When you start getting that type of feedback, it completely changes the interaction with the customer to where you're able to deliver what's most valuable in ways that the customer won't even be able to tell you until they start seeing things come through. Like, wow, we got this in 2 weeks instead of this was something we weren't expecting to get 12 months from now. The way that a customer will talk about priorities is very different if they've had experience getting things in 2 weeks than the way they'll talk about it if they've never seen anything delivered in less than 6 months. Okay, so how would you resolve the going fast, slow makes you slow paradox? And these are things we've talked about, but which of these do you think is the most important thing that you would do with a team if you're trying to deliver more rapidly? Would be talk to them about how getting many things done is much less valuable than getting the right things done? Would you work with the team to prove you can deliver small things by delivering them and getting feedback? Or talk to them about how waiting to get experience delivering. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble saying this. Okay. Waiting to get experience delivering in order to do things right often results in doing things wrong. And doing things wrong could be as simple as working on the less important things, or it could be building lots of stuff that the customer just absolutely does not need because that's what everybody was thinking needed to be there because we're not getting rapid turnaround. I'm going to throw this. Did that link ever show up to people? Did it ever show up to where you're able to see the Slido stuff within WebEx? That is showing up now? Okay, great. Cool. And just so you know, I do have my stuff configured to where if people are on video, I can see. It used to be I'd see not everyone, and but a new update came through, and so I can just see people that have their video on. So if you are in a place where you feel like you would like to have your video on, I can see reactions. So Lucas just gave me a thumbs up, and I was able to see that, or like a real thumb up, stuff like that. So I also saw everybody else's thumbs up too. So okay, so this is, and like I said, there's no right or wrong answer here. What I'm wanting to get us to do is just kind of think about how would we approach that with our team and kind of interact a little bit with it. Okay, so kind of also on the idea of doing things quickly, trying to write code quickly will usually push a team away from writing tests. Because you've probably been in a situation, the customer wants the software quickly, but writing tests requires writing twice as much code. So it's hard for the team to justify writing the test because they're trying to work really, really quickly. So in this type of situation, it looks like, we know tests are important, but also delivering is important. So now we've got this tension here. How do we go ahead and prioritize writing tests when we may be saying we're going to write twice as much? Customer wants software quickly. Writing tests requires writing twice as much code. What do we actually need to do quickly? And twice as much may even be a low. I've been in situations where when the project has gotten going, writing the test actually is most of the coding that's happening. And that's, which would really freak people out. Like, why are we spending all this time writing tests? But what do we actually need to do quickly? Well, the speed at which you can prove the software works is much more important. And to do that, you need tests. So this is a different way of looking at it, because if we're thinking in terms of how fast can I get code out the door, writing tests may not make any sense. It may not feel like it's worth investing in. But if we think in terms of how rapidly can I prove that the software does what it's supposed to do, all of a sudden the tests become much more important and maybe become one of the primary things we want to invest in. Yes, the customer wants working software quickly. That's a good point. If I can produce software, if the customer doesn't care if the software works, I can produce software that doesn't work extremely rapidly, right? But that's not necessarily going to be very valuable to the customer. To write correct code quickly, you must have a way to prove it's correct. If that proof process is slow, you won't be able to deliver quickly. So if your proof process requires giving things to people and letting them work on it for 6 weeks and then let you know, that's going to dramatically slow down your ability to deliver code to the customer. Now, it may feel like you're going really fast because I wrote all this code and now I'm done and I move on to something else. But if lots of that stuff comes back to you and you have to fix it, you're not actually you're not actually moving very quickly on stuff. There was a very big project that I'm happy to say I did not work on, but they brought me in to kind of look at and say, what would you do in this situation? And so I came and kind of wrote and said, here's what I would do. But the problem they were running into, and this is a large government project, they had brought in a large consulting firm that was working on delivering this system. I believe it was some type of auction system. And they were knocking out their stories. Bang, bang, bang. They do the stories, get the developers to finish the stories. It would get turned over to QA. They'd do stuff. And then if they found any issues, they would create new, I think they called them tickets or issues or whatever. Anyway, I got to looking at their numbers and I said, you realize you are creating new issues to fix faster than you're completing the stories that you say are fixed. So they would complete one story and say it was done, but then log 5 issues about how that story actually wasn't done. So one way of looking at it is after they had worked for 3 or 4 months, they actually had more work to do because there were more things to try to fix than before they had started. But that type of people were very, very busy. There were lots of tickets being closed, but they were actually going backwards rather than forward. And that's where we have to really make sure we're measuring things correctly and that we're looking at the ultimate goal. If the goal was just to close stories, they could have just gone in and closed all of the stories and then had people start filing bug reports, right? That's progress. Well, no, that sounds silly if you say it that way, but that's exactly what was happening, except for they were doing work as part of it. Anyway, this is something you probably experienced. Actually, give a thumbs up if you've experienced this type of thing before, where you're so quickly trying to do stuff that you forget what you're actually trying to do, and you end up doing things that are not beneficial at all. And this is really easy to do. There's a story by H.G. Wells. I think it's H.G. Wells, called "The Pearl." Can't remember what it's called exactly. Anyway, it's about this prince. He's in love with this princess, and they're married, and everything is wonderful. You get the idea. It's kind of set in India, and anyway, she gets bit by a spider or something. Anyway, she dies, and he's just heartbroken about it. Doesn't eat for days and stuff, and finally decides he's going to dedicate his life to memorializing the love of his life. So he starts building this big building that was all centered around, she's buried in the center of it, and just keeps building on it, building on it, building on it. And every year, like his entire life is dedicated to this. Every year he makes it bigger and bigger, and he puts stuff in and then tears it down because it doesn't feel right, keeps on building. And like toward the end of his life, he's looking at it's like it's almost perfect. And he's looking at there's just one thing that seems odd. It doesn't seem to go with the rest of it, and it's right in the center of it. And he's like, yeah, take that thing out. If we take that out, we'll make it perfect. And it's where she's actually buried. So he got so caught up in what he was trying to do that he forgot, in making this thing, that he forgot why he was actually trying to do it. And I think type of that type of mistake is very easy to make in software as well, where we get so focused on doing the work that we forget what's the goal of doing the work. Okay, so what is the best way to explain to a team the importance of writing tests? Is it to get them focused on that it doesn't matter how fast we can write incorrect code? Like, how would you explain this to your team if you started running into this tomorrow morning? It doesn't matter how fast we can write incorrect code. To give users something early on, we need a way to safely evolve the application to the next thing that they need, and tests are going to be a very important part of being able to evolve safely. Or test and enable safe changes. Without them, we will be hesitant to deliver rapidly. And like I said, there aren't right or wrong answers here. I just want to kind of give us the chance to think about how we would articulate this to people. So hopefully when we have to, because like I said, tomorrow morning you may have an opportunity to try to explain this to someone, or maybe even this afternoon. Okay, looks like most of us are in the camp of getting people focused. Oh, it just switched. That test enables safe changes. Without them, we'll be hesitant to deliver rapidly. And notice this kind of ties into the other piece too, right? Of being able to deliver small things. If we want to deliver small things rapidly, then this item becomes very, very important about being able to actually deliver small things rapidly, because we can prove it works correctly. Okay, let's talk about planning. Planning can be very, very important, right? Projects, you may have been in situations where you've seen that projects without good planning fail. On the other hand, you may have been in places where you've seen that so do projects with lots of planning, right? So I was on a recent project that they had decided early on that the problem with all the other things that had gone wrong, other things that hadn't been successful in the organization, was that there wasn't sufficient planning. So they planned this, the most effort I've seen gone into planning a software project like this. That project eventually failed as well. And the reason it did wasn't because they lacked planning. The reason is they had lots of planning. And so now we've got our paradox, right? If we don't plan enough, we'll fail. If we really plan things well, we may fail. Well, maybe this is another thing of the vantage point or the dimension. Maybe we're planning the wrong things. So is our plan designed to deal with unknowns? Because if we create a plan that makes us do wrong things longer than we would without a plan, we may be just shooting ourselves in the foot. So, and that's what actually happened with this project, is they had a plan that was so detailed that when things weren't working well and they should have been getting feedback to help readjust, they were stuck with that plan and ended up doing the wrong thing a lot longer than they would have had they had a general guidance, if they had had a plan that was built around, here's how we think things are going to change and how we're going to adapt to change, which is obviously one of the Agile principles, how we're going to adapt to change, rather than here's a list of everything we need to do, and if we do all these things in the sequence, then there'll be no problems. There's a certain amount of, some of this comes down to the idea of the hubris of assuming that we can lay out a plan and that's exactly how life is going to look like. Versus saying, here's an idea of where we need to head, and here's how we plan to handle contingencies. One of the big things with Agile principles is stopping and reflecting on how to do things better. If we have a plan that keeps us from actually doing that in a meaningful way, we are probably setting ourselves up for failure. Let's see. Okay, so this picture, I was trying to get a picture that conveyed a sense of urgency. So if we think about projects, I've been on projects that failed because they didn't, or been on project or seen projects that have failed because there wasn't really the team did not have a sense of urgency. They had to, I show up for work and I do whatever they tell me to do, and then I go home, and that's just the way things are. And this organization isn't interested in improving anything anyway, so that's just life. On the other hand, I've been on I've worked with organizations that have teams that are there's such a sense of urgency conveyed that they end up making lots and lots of bad decisions because everybody is just in panic mode. So here we've got our kind of our paradox, right? If we have no sense of urgency, we'll fail. If we convey a sense of urgency, it can create panic and make bad decisions. So how do we actually balance these things? So what dimension or vantage point will resolve this particular paradox? Well, maybe it has to do with we need to think about what's being made urgent, because there's lots of different dimensions we could create urgency in, and some of those may inspire different types of behavior than others. So one of the things I've worked with a lot of organizations to do is say, are we creating urgency around the idea of being finished and the customer having everything that they've ever asked for? Because if we do that, it's probably going to inspire us to do things like batch lots of things together or put off getting feedback from the customer because they might change something that would slow us down. So we probably don't want urgency around how do we get all these things done, finished and we're done. On the other hand, if we have more urgency around the concept of how do we get something into the customer's hands so they can start benefiting from it, and if it turns out it's not the right thing, we start getting feedback so we can change things. That is an entirely different type of urgency, and that inspires very, very different behavior. Because if we're trying to think of terms of how do we get things into customers' hands quickly, so we'll get feedback, we probably are going to move away from trying to batch large groups of things together. We're probably going to move toward trying to have some type of automated delivery pipeline so we can get that stuff to them really quickly, really small things through all the way quickly, and then start getting feedback from them. So it's not just a matter of, if we just think of urgency, we're going to be thinking in urgency of getting the project done. But if we think of urgency of how do we satisfy, looking at the Agile principles again, how do we get feedback from the customer and get satisfaction from the customer and get value to the customer, that's probably going to be a much better sense of urgency. I remember talking to the manager at one place, and I was we were having discussion around the team needs a sense of urgency, and this team was doing well. They had a sense of urgency, but I was encouraging him to think about how he was managing. And if he came in every day and said, "When will the project be done?" When is the project going to be done? That was going to inspire very different behavior than if he came in and said, "Hey, how far are we from getting our first thing through that the customer can start using?" And so he started doing that. He'd come through and say, "Hey, how long do we think it's going to be till we get our first deployment through so we can start getting feedback from the customer?" And it was a very small shift, but inspired very, very different behavior. Somebody's pointing out, Stephanie's pointing out that there are different types of urgency. So one example I use sometimes with this is if so my dog, who's now wandered off, we live on a fairly busy street, and we're careful. We only go out with her. But still, she's off leash and running around, and there's lots of space, and there's a fence, but she could get through to the road. Well, early on when we were training her, we were trying to make sure that we were inspiring urgency to come back to us that was not based on fear, right? If she starts to run toward the road and we just start yelling and yelling at her, that might create a sense of urgency, but it might create an urgency that's get away from the guy that's yelling at me, which might push her out into the road. On the other hand, what we found, she's a healer, so she will, half healer, half poodle. She loves to follow kids and nip at their heels. So we also found we could create another type of sense of urgency, which was there's something running, I'm going to chase it. So if she starts running toward the road, we don't run toward her, we'll run away from her. I mean, now she knows where the road is, but when she was younger, we'd run away from her and call her, and now it's a game. And now there's a huge positive sense of urgency of let's go chase somebody versus being something's chasing me and I'm terrified. I may not know exactly why. Now I'm going to run away from it and run out into the road. So not to try to compare people to dogs, but there's very different behavior that you get depending on what type of urgency you're creating. Okay, so that covers what I wanted to cover with the paradoxes. So now we're going to do a quick fun quiz, give away a shirt. I have a bunch of these. I think I may be out of some sizes, but I've got the Turn Your Video On shirt. So this is what we're giving away, is one of the Agile Lunch and Learn shirts. So go ahead and join, and somebody will win here. And we'll get one of these shirts headed your way. I have some more shirts. I just haven't gotten around to printing them because the foosball table is in the way of the t-shirt printer right now. So we'll have to get that out. So go ahead and join here. I'm going to throw the link here again just in case anyone doesn't have it. As you're joining, I'll tell you, I had an interesting thing happen this week. We were going around doing some camping, and a client needed some help with stuff. They had somebody leave, and they were needing to make sure everything was locked down the way it needed to be and stuff. So I was on a telephone call with several people, And before we went on our camping trip, we had a bunch of kids over here for a big party, mostly teens, but we had some younger kids too. And I thought I'll buy some soda pop for everybody. And my initial, I'm not necessarily my initial thought was I'm going to just buy a bunch of Mountain Dew and we'll see which parents watch their kids and which they don't. Because if you let your 5-year-old go and drink 3 Mountain Dews and they can't get him to sleep, it's on you. I resisted that temptation and got caffeine-free drinks. So I had a bunch of cream soda and a bunch of root beer. Well, there was some left. So I'm on this call. I was like, you know what? It's hot here. We're down in Arkansas, so I'm going to grab a cream soda and I opened it. Well, the mic was really good on my phone, and so evidently the people were like thinking I was sitting there popping beers, like, okay, this is going to be a long day, and I'm sitting there. So I got to explain that it was cream soda, and no, I'm not like drinking on the job with them, but. Anyway, okay, I think we got everybody joined. I put the link there. Okay, give it 3 more seconds to join and we will start. Okay, first question. Changing what 2 things can resolve most paradoxes? The number of people on the team and work from home schedule, the dimension being measured in your vantage point, the Agile framework being used in the procurement process, or the number of Scrum Masters and pet at work policy? Changing what 2 things can resolve most paradoxes? Okay, and yeah, there were a lot of words on there, so some of this may be a speed test more than anything else. So yes, the dimension being measured and your vantage point. There probably is opportunity for different Agile frameworks and procurement process, but the main 2 things we're thinking of, the paradoxes we were talking about today, was the dimensions being measured and your vantage point. So if we're thinking of a graph and there's two axes there and it seems to be a paradox, maybe there's a different dimension or different axes that we should be thinking of and related to it. Okay, there's our leaderboard. Very good. Moving on. In Back to the Future, why would Dr. Brown refuse to read Marty's letter warning him about the future? Was it because he didn't want to be spoiled by surprises? He didn't want to change the future? He was worried about the fabric space-time continuum? Or he did read the letter and change the future? Okay. He didn't want to change the future. Okay, so that I could see how that would be correct, but in the movie, he actually did read the letter and decided to wear a bulletproof vest. Hopefully, I'm not giving too much away. I'm now curious how many people have seen the movie, or maybe it's just been so long that because I didn't remember much of it either. And we're like I didn't watch that with our kids, but we've like gone full '90s immersion with our kids. We got a copy of, or I guess this is even '80s. I found on sale a copy of season 2 of MacGyver, so we've been watching through that with my kids. So they're getting the full '80s experience now, and they love it. And I didn't realize how outrageous some of the plots were for some of those things, but it's still fun. Okay, LC pulls into the top spot, followed by Lucas, Lynn, Jennifer, and Jennifer. Oh, that's gonna be tough. Okay, we've got 2 Jennifers. There's capital J and lowercase j. Okay, let's see how it goes. When a team gets too focused on going fast, what is likely to occur? They won't be able to hire enough people. More work will happen on lower priorities, slowing down higher priorities. Time travel or unprovable statements will be created. When they get too focused on going fast, what is likely to occur? Yes, more work will happen on lower priorities, which slow down the high priorities. And as we talked about this, because it's really easy to overlook that this can happen. If we're focused on going fast, we'll tend to batch things together and we'll end up with lots of low priority work being part of what we're delivering. Whereas if we're more focused on how do we deliver small things all the way through, that's the other dimension, right? Is delivering small things all the way through instead of just trying to go fast to complete everything. If we're focused on how do we get something into the smallest thing possible into the customer's hands that makes them smile, I like that as a measurement, it will change it to where we're able to get higher priority things done because we're working in smaller batches. Okay, LC still in the top spot. And next, how does a detailed plan sometimes wreck a team? Because management doesn't like the plan, or instead of adjusting to changing conditions, the team may continue to follow irrelevant parts of the plan. The plan may have been made by nefarious agents, maybe aliens, or the plan will show management how the team is doing. How can a detailed plan sometimes wreck a team? And yes, it looks like instead of adjusting conditions, changing conditions, the team may continue to follow irrelevant parts of the plan. So management may not like the plan. That's possible. The main thing we were focused on here was how if we have a plan and we follow the plan instead of reacting to change, we may do things longer that we should have stopped and said, hey, this isn't working. If you think about imagine, I don't know if you've ever played the game, done it with kids, where they give you a detailed list of, you do this, like how to navigate a room on tiles or something like that. And so they start, and you're trying to follow literally everything that they say to do. Well, if they give you a whole long plan that's like many, many steps, and you start out and there's a problem at the beginning, you can end up running into walls and all kinds of things. I used to do this with kids as a way to get them to thinking about programming. On the other hand, if you take a step and then they rework their plan, then you take another step and they rework their plan, they're adapting as they go, and you'll probably end up wherever the kids want you to go. But this is the type of thing that it's really easy to see when you've got kids writing down steps of how to do things. One of the more interesting ones I've seen on YouTube is the kids write instructions about how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so it's like, take the bread. So the guy takes the bread and sets down the loaf of bread. And then it says, put peanut butter on the bread. So he just grabs a whole thing of peanut butter and sets it on the whole loaf of bread still in the plastic. And the kids are like, no, that's not what we meant. And it seems really funny when you do that, but plans for software things I've seen those do the exact same thing. Like they've got all these things and it's all based on the very first step that they take, which turned out to be wrong. And, they work for a year doing the wrong thing, and then it either gets canceled or gets, redone or handed off to another team or whatever. Okay, LC, followed by David, followed by Lucas, Huzo, and Lynn. How can we resolve the paradox that a team needs urgency, but urgency can cause bad shortcuts? Management needs to bring donuts while conveying urgency. I like that idea. Sandwich communication about urgency between accolades for good work. Fire anyone who doesn't seem to be acting urgently, or create urgency for healthy behaviors. And yes, we're wanting to create urgency for healthy behaviors. These now the donuts, I like the idea of donuts. I'm not sure if that will actually help, but anything we can do to get management bringing more donuts, I think is a win. In this particular case, though, we were mainly talking about how to make sure that we're getting urgency for things that we actually want done, that will actually help us move forward. Because if we create urgency that makes us work in larger batches or defer getting feedback from customers, and if we're getting teams really focused on how do they finish the entire project, they may see getting interaction from the customers as being an impediment to delivering the entire thing. So that type of urgency actually pushes them away from the good behavior, which is to get that really rapid feedback from customers. So we want to create urgency for healthy behaviors. Okay, congratulations, LC. You won, and I know I threw people off by throwing movie trivia in there, but hopefully that adds just a little bit of randomness to it. So LC took the top spot, followed by David, Lucas, Huzo, and Lynn. But LC, send me, you can take a screenshot of this. Should say that you won, or just send me an email, reply to something I sent you, and say what. Let me know what T-shirt size you want and where you want it sent, and we'll get that to you. It looks like our hardest question was the one about Back to the Future. So maybe we all ought to watch Back to the Future again. So if we have this type of thing, no, I'm not planning on including this in a lot of other stuff. So, well, thank you everybody for coming. We've got, I think next week, my daughter's got some college interviews, so I'm not going to do one that week. We will do one the week after that. And then I think the last week in August, we're trying to finalize it. But I should have somebody from Google coming to talk about artificial intelligence and how that looks for developer, how it's going to change the way that we do our work as development teams and teams that are delivering software. So I'm still getting that finalized with him. It's on the calendar, but if it all comes together, we've got some really interesting things coming up the rest of this year. I've also got somebody coming from Amazon to talk about Deep Racer, which is their machine learning little robotic car and how that looks. So that's going to be pretty, I think that's going to be fun. And some other things coming up. And then I will still be talking as well about different things related to Agile. So be watching for those invites, and feel free to pass any of them on if there's anything that you see that would be useful for your team. But thank you so much for coming. I'll stick around if anybody's got any questions or want to talk. I'd love to talk to you, but thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. That was really good.